has the Trump administration just gone out and violated due process of law and hurt this poor guy who has been commonly referred to as the Maryland man? Are we now living in a kind of dystopian fascist universe where the Trump administration just comes in and picks you up the street and ships you off to jail in El Salvador, where you get put into prisons comprised of drug dealers and thugs and international terrorists just because Trump doesn't like you? Or did the United States deport someone that was in the country illegally and is potentially a member of a violent gang that is also categorized as a terrorist organization? Because apparently there's two very, very different narratives about what just took place with respect to what the media has dubbed and what social media has dubbed as the Maryland man, because that's, of course, how they describe him. We're going to be going through today and we're going to be looking at this case, and we're going to go through the various concepts, the legal concepts. We're going to go through the various philosophical concepts with respect to what does it mean to have a country? What does it mean to have borders? What does it mean to have a legal immigration process? And what do you do when people potentially violate that process? Should there be more legal proceedings in order to determine whether or not somebody is a member of a violent gang before you repatriate them to their own country? Can the court simply just order the president of the United States to return somebody? Is this an issue of foreign policy? Is it an issue of immigration policy? What all is going on here? Because again, listening to the various sides argue this issue, you would think we were talking about two entirely different people, but we're not. We're talking about the same guy. So what's the truth? That is what we're going to be discussing today on Making the Argument. And look, we're even going to play a little bit of devil's advocate. We'll play a little bit of devil's advocate. Is there areas where the Trump administration has gone too far, or has he not gone far enough? All of that and more coming up on this episode. I am your host, Nick Freitas. With me in the studio, my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
Hello, everyone.
And then, of course, we have our resident historian, our political prognosticator, the Oracle of Virginia, Christian Hines.
Oh, you're not going to ask me how I'm doing?
No, I don't care. I don't care.
I was waiting.
No.
How are you doing, Christian?
Well, thank you. Somebody finally cares.
Well, it isn't me. Anyway, moving on.
Today is somebody's birthday.
It is.
And it's not mine.
It is not
mine
yours.
Mine was like a week ago.
Yours is a week ago.
It's
Today is the good
Hamilton.
the Hamilton that doesn't like central banking, Nick Hamilton, producer extraordinary. Yeah, affectionately referred to on the show now by our audience as Pretty Nick.
Yeah.
Pretty Nick, in the manliest way possible. That's right, ladies. He's single. It may be one more. It's one more rotation around the sun. But Nick Hamilton is.
We should have his photo that we could just like pop up on the screen there when we introduce him. But
yeah, that's right, Nick Hamilton. In the future, we need you to send us your favorite thirst trap photo that we can put up for all of the ladies.
Oh my gosh.
Oh man. All right, let's
not do that and
what are
say
you
we
talking
didn't.
about?
I wanted a photo of him with a little birthday hat and like,
Yeah. Something like that. Yeah. Christian got like on the show, he got balloons and a cake he didn't like.
And a cake that I didn't like.
And a cake I didn't like. And
disgusting
Dr.
cake.
Pepper that
Dr.
he drank.
Peppers
I
that he
still
didn't
have
like.
those Dr. Peppers.
Yeah.
The room temperature ones that are sitting on the floor right now.
Oh my gosh, I don't understand that. I don't understand
It's very European to drink room temperature soda.
Are you doing European things on this show, Christian? We've talked about this, haven't we?
I actually don't like ice. In
wow.
I did not realize that you
doesn't like
the irony.
Wow. The irony of this podcast and you not liking ice.
You're not liking ice.
Why?
Well, for those of us who are real
you scared
Americans
they're going
who love
to
ice.
Are you afraid they're going to deport you?
Because
the left
chance.
is making everybody think that
you're
now
next.
ICE is going to deport American citizens because Maryland man got deported.
I have to say, like, there's a chance that Nick here might actually be talking to the one and only, the great Stephen Miller at some point in the future. Don't tell him that I don't like ice.
We like that kind of ice.
Yeah. Well, before we jump into this, I want to introduce you all to a brand new partner of the MTA podcast, because let's be honest, prices have not just gone up, they've launched into orbit. And if you, like most Americans, you've probably had to lean on credit cards just to cover gas, the power bill, or groceries at some point in the last several years. But if you own a home, American Financing can help. They're a family-owned mortgage lender that's been around for 25 years, licensed in all 50 states. They help homeowners use their home's equity to pay off high-interest debt, and their customers save about $800 a month on average. Their consultants are not on commission, so they're not trying to sell you something you don't need, no upfront or hidden fees, and thanks to in-house underwriting, you may be able to close in as fast as 10 days and maybe even delay 2 mortgage payments in the process. So if you are one of those people that have found yourselves in that situation, stop drowning in interest and call 888-961-4143. That's 888-961-4143, or go to americanfinancing.net/MTA-NMLS-182334. And again, we certainly appreciate them coming on and advertising through, making the argument. All right. Well, we're going to jump into the question here. Is Kilmar Ábrego García, is he a member of an El Salvadorian, violent El Salvadorian gang? Is he a domestic abuser, or is he just a Maryland man trying to get back to his family in the United States? Which one of these things is true, Christian?
I mean, I don't know about you, but when I think of Maryland men, I clearly think of people who crossed the border illegally from a Central American country. What was this, like 12 years ago or something like that? Yeah, I mean, just homegrown, probably loves crabs.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like
big blue crab guy. Yeah. Yeah, probably loves the Ravens. Probably a big Ravens fan.
Yeah, maybe an Orioles fan. Yeah.
He's probably got a Cal Ripken poster and is like, that's definitely the picture of the Maryland man. And let's just say right off the bat,
he's just a family man.
He's just a family man.
He wants to get back to his family.
Yeah. Well, look, here's the deal. Okay, I'll play devil's advocate. I had somebody call at my office once, and she goes, Delegate Freitas, I'm not your constituent, but I need your help. Okay, what do you need my help with? She goes, my mother brought me to this country when I was 2 years old. I have lived here she goes, it was illegal. She was given a court date. She didn't show up for it. It's like, okay, yep, that's all illegal. And she's like, yes, it's illegal. She goes, I've been here. She goes, I've been here all my life. I'm married. I'm married to an American citizen. I have 4 kids. And now the Biden administration is going to deport me. And I said, well, let me see what we can do, because I obviously understood that under certain conditions and circumstances, and the fact that she's been married to an American citizen for years now, and they have a family here and 4 kids, and they were going to have to deport the entire family, like if they wanted to stay together. I think most Americans will look at a situation like that and say, look, we're not going to reward this behavior, but we also understand that this is probably not the best use of our ICE resources.
They're not the priority, but the Biden administration would make them a priority in order to put them up as a poster child.
And that is one of the things that you commonly see in the way that the left engages in law enforcement. It's like when they have to enforce a law they don't like, they will ignore the 99 cases,
the murderers.
They'll ignore the 99 cases that we're all looking at going, yeah, this is what we want you to do, and say, we found her. Like the 2-year-old that was brought over that now has, 4 kids that are American citizens and a husband that's an American citizen. That is where we will focus our efforts on deportation. And then you get a case like this, right? And the press dubs this guy a Maryland man.
And Democrats are going to move heaven and earth in order to bring him back into the country.
Yeah.
Well, as if he's an American citizen, which helps them with their, hey, all you American citizens, this administration's going to deport you to El Salvador prisons now.
Well, let's look at, and again, just to hammer this point home, I think we got a link to an article up here.
This is how the media is framing this.
Yeah. So, and again, just so you know, we're not making this up, and we're not cherry picking. If you type in Maryland man deported.
Can you zoom in on that, Christian?
Okay, let me try. It's just, for our audio listeners here, it's just article after article.
Yeah.
Senator Van Hollen denied meeting in El Salvador with Kilmar Ábrego García, man who was deported. What is it going to say? Man who was mistakenly deported from the U.S.
Mistakenly deported. That's what.
And there was no mistake. Was there?
Baby, just
hang on.
Hang on.
Hey, she loves doing this.
I know, right? It's like, bam, right. This is why if she sees a movie before me, I can't even be in the same house with her until I've seen the movie.
Sorry.
ABC News: Senator heads to El Salvador to find Maryland migrant, not El Salvadorian migrant.
Erroneously.
Yeah, he's a Maryland migrant. So he migrated from Maryland, or
USA Today: White House defends wrongful deportation of Maryland man.
So okay, real quick. Again,
this is the framing that they're going with.
If you want to know, again, we've already discussed this. I think everyone agrees with this. But every time you think, gosh, is the Democratic Party or is the press going to understand the problems with what they've done and the way they've reported things? The answer is no. They cannot help themselves. This is a USA Today, right? I guarantee you that if you were to talk to anybody at USA Today, they would advertise themselves as an objective news agency. However, White House defends wrongful deportation of Maryland Man, that was
1 hour ago.
1 hour ago. So we're going to get into some of the stuff that has come out since then. Right, because there's been like 72 hours from when this first took place, or a little bit more than that.
The story's been going on for a while.
They're still reporting it like this 1 hour ago,
yes.
when all of the legitimate information has been out for 3 days now.
Yeah.
But they're still reporting it like this because it does well for them.
It's just incredible. Like, I mean, the way that they're doing this framing is that the media with their headlines is making it seem like that the Biden administration has deported an American citizen.
No, the Trump administration.
Sorry, yes. That the Trump administration has deported an American citizen who deserves to be here, and that it was done illegally, wrongfully, that this was, that we've shipped off a completely innocent man to some prison in El Salvador, and that this is some gross violation of the law. Oh, the other framing too. Is that Trump overruled or ignored a 9-0 Supreme Court ruling demanding that he be returned to the U.S. So the framing that we're seeing from Democrats right now and their water-carrying allies in the media is that Trump wrongfully deported a Maryland man after disobeying a 9-0 Supreme Court ruling demanding that he be returned to the U.S.
Yeah.
And anybody that sees this, I mean, here's Chris Murphy, U.S. Senator from Connecticut. This guy's a piece of work, by the way.
Yeah.
He says this is bone chilling. He's quote tweeting for our audio listeners. He's quote tweeting a tweet of actually an exchange between President Bukele and President Trump in the White House from a few days ago. Bukele is the president of El Salvador, and he was asked about this case, and Bukele's like, "Well, no, we're not going to send him back to the country. He's our citizen.
Yeah.
What do you want me to like smuggle somebody illegally into the country? That's not, I don't have the power to do that." And Chris Murphy says this is bone chilling. A court ordered Kilmar Garcia to stay in the United States. The Supreme Court ruled 9-0 that he was illegally removed. Trump is pretending he won the ruling 9-0. You may not think this case means anything to you, but let me tell you why it does. And he has this giant thread basically. And the TLDR of the thread is effectively that Trump's people are engaged in nuclear grade gaslighting. They say it's up to El Salvador if they want to send him back. BS. We bring people back here all the time when we wrongfully remove them. They could get this guy in a hot second if they wanted to. And then he goes on to be like, you might not think this case matters to you, but he was legally in the U.S. just like the rest of us. His status as an immigrant doesn't matter as a matter of law. If Trump can lock up or remove anyone, no matter what the courts say, then we are all at grave risk.
I love that the one before that is nuclear grade gaslighting. And then it's Trump could lock up or deport anyone in the United States anytime he wants. This is another one of those areas where I look at, again, this is Chris Murphy. We're not talking about some random Reddit channel. We're talking about the sitting senator from Connecticut.
But that's what I love is this is where they've drawn their line in the sand. And the evidence is not on their side. The information's not on their side, but the gaslighter always accuses everyone else of gaslighting. It's insane to me that the left has been engaging in this type of propaganda for ages and ages. And now that they don't have a stranglehold on all media sources, they don't know what to do. So they're just doubling down.
Well, but Tina, if we normalize this,
there's no end.
He can lock up or remove anyone. We will no longer exist in a democracy. There's that special word again.
Oh, yeah.
So that, and by the way, just in case people think that this is like one random, not that he's random, he's a U.S. senator, right? But in case people think this is one politician that's bringing this up, no, this is like the entire Democratic Party. I want to briefly just blitz through this.
It's wild to me that this is where the Democratic Party is going. They're going to fight here. This is where they're going to fight.
This is the hill that they're dying on. Here's a Democrat congressman from Massachusetts. Ask yourself, what's going to stop the government from deporting you
to a prison
in El Salvador? How could you prove that it's an error if you don't have due process? It can happen to anyone. It can happen to you, John Q. Public, American citizen.
Yeah.
Somebody who was born here.
Oh, I don't know about you.
Actual Maryland men.
I don't know about you, but I walk around terrified that I'm about to be deported to El Salvador, just like in any given. I mean, with a name like Freitas, I mean, that sounds vaguely Hispanic.
But the problem is this is how disconnected from their districts they are, because the people in their districts have far more of a chance of getting raped or murdered by an El Salvadorian gang member than they do getting deported by their own country to a foreign nation.
So here's
they don't even care about Americans.
So on that point, here's one of the 2 U.S. senators from Maryland who's doing a lot of constituent work for somebody who's not his constituent and doesn't live in his state anymore because he was been, sent back to his home country that he's an actual citizen of. Chris Van Hollen flew down there to El Salvador to meet with the El Salvadorian government to demand that they send this man back to Maryland, who's, again, an illegal immigrant. So he puts out this tweet. I mean, he's making a huge spectacle about this. Look, it's got 84,000 likes, although it also has 25,000 replies. Most of them are not positive.
No.
And he says, I just landed in El Salvador a little while ago. I look forward to meeting with the team at the U.S. Embassy to discuss the release of Ábrego García. I hope to meet with Salvadorian officials and with Kilmar himself. He was illegally abducted and needs to come home. I love
real quick. I don't understand. Isn't the senator terrified of not being allowed back into the country? I mean, he sent himself to El Salvador, and we were just told by a different member of Congress that anybody can be deported or locked up at any given time. I mean, this senator is putting himself in real danger.
Yeah, well, he's self-deported. How's he going to get back now?
Here's another senator, Cory Booker from New Jersey. The Supreme Court was clear. The Trump administration must act to facilitate the return of Kilmar Ábrego García to the United States. There is no room for debate, yet Trump is refusing in defiance of a lawful court order. Every member of Congress should be standing up for the Constitution and demanding that the administration act to return Mr. Ábrego García to the U.S. and to his family. And we must all remember an attack on the right to due process of anyone is a threat to the due process rights of everyone. First off, since when did Democrats care about the Constitution?
Since when do they care about due process?
Since when do they care? This is the same party that facilitated the largest mass migrant crisis in American history over the last 4 years. It was 10 to 20 million illegal immigrants came into the country during the Biden administration, and now they want to lecture us about the Constitution and due process.
Well, I would say I don't think they know what due process is, because they are looking at the due process of this guy and saying that it was not due process and that he needs some other kind of due process.
Real quick, go back to the Chris Murphy thread. I want to point out one thing here that's important. Scroll up a little bit. Let me see here. So he has this point where he talks about came to the U.S. 10 years ago. He married a U.S. citizen and has 3 U.S. citizen children. But he put in removal proceedings because he didn't apply for asylum in time and because of alleged ties to drug gangs. He denies any gang affiliation. Now, I want to point something out because this sounds a little bit similar to what I was saying before about this young woman that came over when she was 2, right? It's not, because 1, she was brought over when she was 2. Secondly, the other thing that's important here is he put in removal proceedings because he didn't apply for asylum. So understand something. This is what I want everyone to understand when all of these Democrats talk about he was legally in the United States. He was legally in the United States. He was legally in the United States. So Chris Murphy himself seems to suggest that, well, actually he wasn't. And 2, how do you get to legal status in the United States? Oh, you cross the border illegally and then you claim asylum. And now under especially under the Biden administration, oh, now you're here legally. Well, wait, but you crossed the border. Well, yeah, sure. But I was seeking asylum.
That process means that according to Chris Murphy's ideal for immigration law, there is nothing that can stop any of the 7 billion people in the world from showing up to Brownsville, Texas, and demanding asylum and entry into the United States.
Yes.
And from his own logic and his thread, anybody in the world can do that. They could just fly to Mexico. They could buy a plane ticket, fly. And by the way, people are doing this.
Yeah.
You have people from Southeast Asia. You have Chinese. You have Indians. You have Vietnamese. You have people from Africa, the Middle East. And by the way, many of these people are not coming from stable countries. And we don't have any records. We don't know anything about them. We don't know who they are at all. And during the Biden administration, there were literally millions of people. Yeah. And these are not people from Mexico. These are people from the entire world that would fly to Mexico, or in some cases, they'd fly to Guatemala or El Salvador, and they would just walk through the Central American countries, walk up to the border, and claim asylum.
And to give you an idea, how this works, because we actually talked about this on a Doge episode last Wednesday. where we pointed out like all these people screaming about, well, they're legal. They're here legally. They're here legally. Okay. What is the process to get here legally? And then what is the process to get a social security number assigned to you? Well, you do exactly what you just mentioned. You fly into Panama from wherever, right? Or you just walk up through Central America. You get to the U.S. border. You cross illegally. You get caught. You claim asylum. Then what happens is they give you a court date, right? And then they release you into the United States. And because you have a court date that's coming up, and by the way, when you have millions of people crossing the border, it turns out that court dates for this sort of thing get pushed along because the court has to determine whether or not you're actually a legitimate asylum seeker, right? And that's a somewhat subjective claim.
Oh yeah.
So you're here now. Okay, well now what happens? Well, after you're here legally now for 6 months, you can apply for a work permit. Once you apply for a work permit, you can apply for a social security number so that the United States government can collect taxes as you're working. Now, to give you an idea, this may happen a couple 100,000 times a year typically. Do you want to know how many times it happened under the Biden administration? Like in fiscal year 2024 alone, and the fiscal year starts, and I think it's like October of the previous year. Over 2 million people were given social security numbers because of the expanded work permits, because the Biden administration made it easier right before the presidential election for people to come into the country and legally work and get a social security number. He did this at the same time that blue states all over the country were drastically relaxing their voter ID laws and other laws with respect to purging voter registration lists of people that shouldn't be on there. And this is the part where we see the left complaining about the Constitution, a document which, by the way, 5 seconds ago they all thought was, written by a bunch of evil, slave-owning, straight white men, right? But now it's sacred. Now it's sacred, but it's only sacred in the ways that they want it to be sacred. They want to throw out terms like due process. But then they don't want to tell the American people when they say he was wrongly deported because he's in the country illegally. Well, according to Chris Murphy, no, he wasn't. Because he failed to actually support or submit his asylum paperwork. All right,
because of his ties to gang activity. And the other thing too is the whole reason he wanted to seek asylum at the end of the day was because of a rival gang being a threat to him. Well, how is a rival? You gotta admit you're part of a gang in order to say there's a rival gang after you.
Theoretically, well, if it's a rival gang, sure. If you just have a gang after you, it just depends. But the point here is that I don't think people, the media gets away. Democrat congressmen get away with saying things like he was in the country legally. And in people's minds, what they think is, oh, this guy went through the standard immigration process to become an American citizen, or they applied for their work permit to be able to come over, or they applied for their student visa or their work visa or an HB1 visa. And that's why they're here illegally. How did Trump mess that up? Because that's not the legal process. That's not the easiest way to gain legal status in the United States. It's break our laws, claim asylum, and now you're good to go. And they have set it up this way on purpose. And the big thing people need to understand is that this is deliberate. It wasn't because everyone sat around and thought, gosh, this is a common sense way for people to be able to enter the country and claim asylum. No, it's because Democrats want this. Progressive media want this. And now they try to create a legal mechanism where they could get what they want. And anytime you push back on the absolute absurdity of it, they could say, oh my gosh, you illegally deported somebody who is here legally, this poor Maryland man.
And you know the irony of all this? I've got a couple more politicians to go through, but before I do, the irony in all of this is if the entire rest of the world was comprised of, straight white Christian evangelical conservatives.
Yeah.
Right. Like if the entire rest of the world had the demographics of like rural Iowa.
Yeah.
The Democrats would be building the world's most sophisticated border defense system imaginable. We would have the Korean DMZ on the Rio Grande.
It would be mined.
We all know this. Yeah. All of us know this.
They'd be perched at the top with guns ready.
That if the people that were crossing the border illegally were were, you know, the type of people that live in, you know, rural small town Nebraska that, you know, go to an evangelical conservative church, right? And they knew that they would be voting Republican forever.
Yeah.
Like the Democratic Party would be building the most militarized border security in the entire world. They would be demanding zero immigration into the United States.
It would make Egypt's border with Gaza look light, right? Because you're right. This is not about they're only interested in these issues insofar as they think it helps them politically. This idea that this is some sort of like, you know, this is some sort of like deeply held commitment to due process. Really? Show me all the due process you afforded to members of the military that you were kicking out, people that had served multiple combat tours that you were kicking out because they want to get the vaccine. Well, we did technically apply due process because they served in the military. Show me the due process you showed to all the business owners that you just shut down and crushed everything they had worked for their entire life. Show me the due process that you afforded to churches. You know what your due process was then? Emergency powers. That was your due process. Oh, the governor has emergency powers, and now we're going to do whatever the hell we want, and you can deal with it. And then a plurality of Democrats, when asked about it, said, oh, yeah, I think we should be able to take the children of people that refuse to get the vaccine.
Yeah.
This is why when they come here and they're like, oh, gosh, we're so concerned about that. You have repeatedly now shown far more concern for due process when it comes to somebody in the country illegally than you have for the people that have been victims of people who are in the country illegally who commit violent crimes. And that's why, again, I can't emphasize this enough. I am happy to have a good faith argument with somebody that disagrees with me. I had one the other day. I was speaking at Piedmont Community College here in Virginia, speaking to an economics club. And I was speaking with a student who we disagreed on a lot of policies. But you know what I found amazing is that he was willing to be intellectually consistent and honest throughout the entire conversation. He made good faith arguments. I made good faith arguments. These are not good faith arguments. This is propaganda. When USA Today says it has already decided what the outcome is without actually listening to the counter perspective and is now desperately trying to do everything they can within their power to implant in the minds of the American people this image of a random Maryland guy who was sitting around trying to take care of his wife and kids when all of a sudden Trump's ICE shows up and deports this guy wrongfully. And the Supreme Court rules 9-0 that he's got to bring him back, and Trump just ignores it. And now anybody could be deported. And really what they mean is anybody could be deported that doesn't look like a white guy, right? That's what they're actually trying to put out there. But then the question is like, okay, great. We've now heard your perspective. We've read your thread, Chris Murphy. We've seen your tweet, Senator Van Hollen. Can we now hear the other side of this story in order to determine whether or not the Trump administration actually has a pretty good case? Can we at least do that now? And we're going to go to,
you know, there actually is somebody who talks about
look at that. Stephen Miller, the
great
Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, speaks to reporters outside the White House. Now, here's what we're going to do. We're going to listen to this. We're going to listen to this engagement. It's kind of long, totally worth it. And we're gonna break in at various points, and we're gonna ask some questions here. Before we get into this, Loyal to Law said, question, for all those 2 million, can they still be deported and have all the stuff given to them stripped? So he's referring to the 2 million people that were brought in during the fiscal year, I think it was fiscal year 2024 is when it was brought in, who actually received Social Security numbers. Some of those people probably did go through the actual legal process, which is they secured a work visa, they came over, they were issued a Social Security number in order to be able to work. Those people would probably not be stripped of anything. The people that came over just waited, got a work permit, and then applied for a Social Security number. You now have to go through a process in order to be able to do that. But no, that stuff can be taken away and people can be deported, right? Like their asylum can be denied. One of the things that Trump did in his first administration that was actually very, very beneficial to this, he said, look, if you want to seek asylum, that's fine, but you have to do it on that side. You don't get released into the general population of the United States in the hopes that we'll find you when you have to show up for your court appointment. Because a lot of the people that are here illegally have overstayed legal visas, or they came in, were issued a court date, and never returned for it. And so the answer to your question is, yes, something can be done. It probably wouldn't be done for all 2 million people, in part because I actually think we're a little bit more reasonable on this. We say, like, look, if you actually follow our process And we realize it's difficult. We realize it's a hard process. But if you actually follow our process for legally immigrating to the United States, we are an incredibly welcoming country. Incredibly welcoming. But if you violate the law and we give you the same benefits as if you follow the law, well, now our own government has created the perverse incentive to come to the country illegally, because why would you follow this incredibly difficult process if you can just do it illegally and get the same benefits? And that's exactly what the Biden administration was doing. And they didn't do it by accident.
Well, and what's incredibly difficult to you, because a lot of these countries where people are trying to immigrate to the U.S. legally, illegally, or whatever, a lot of the countries they're coming from have far stricter laws about immigration than we do. And so really, it's like, do you want to be an American or not?
Yeah.
If you don't belong here.
Yeah, I would love for us to have like Poland or Hungary's immigration system.
Yeah. All right. Let's go ahead and listen to Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller as he speaks to reporters outside the White House.
This is going to be great. Nick, you're just going to need to tell me when you want to stop and start. I've got 3 timestamps, though, of what I know we have to cover.
Yeah. All right. This is April 14th. Go ahead.
So, never, this whole entire conversation has been wrong from the beginning, because nobody was mistakenly deported anywhere. That's like the big fact that most of you have gotten wrong. No one was mistakenly sent anywhere. The only mistake that was made is a lawyer put an incorrect line in a legal filing, and they've since been relieved of duty. He is El Salvadorian. He is an illegal alien. He was deported to El Salvador. I would welcome anyone here to tell me what country they think we should be sending El Salvadorian illegal aliens to.
Didn't a judge order that he not be deported to El Salvador 5 years ago?
So what you're referring to is an immigration judge. So that's Article 2, not Article 3. So there was no Article 3 restraint on his removal. A withholding order or a cancellation of removal order, first of all, as I'm sure you know, does not eliminate the deportation order, right? We all agree on that. So his status was he's an illegal alien who's been ordered deported, which means he can be indefinitely detained and removed to any other country in the world, right? He could be sent to literally any country on the face of the earth. But the preference, in general matter, is to deport someone to their home country, right? In this case, El Salvador. Because he is a member of a foreign terrorist organization, withholding orders don't apply to FTOs for obvious reasons. So if you had an illegal alien, say from Syria, who's a member of ISIS, they can't apply for withholding of removal. So that principle applies here. Furthermore, the gang that he said was going to persecute him, so this theory that he's an MS-13 and there's this rival gang, the 18th Street Gang, doesn't exist anymore in El Salvador. So the entire concept is false. But again, when the media talks about the idea that there was a mistaken removal, it implies to, I think, a normal listener that the wrong person was sent somewhere. He's an illegal alien from El Salvador. Where was he sent? To El Salvador. Where does he belong? In El Salvador. He belongs.
Sending someone home and sending them into a prison that they could remove.
Pause right there. I want to point something out here. It's like, well, no, you sent him to a prison in El Salvador. Can I just help the press with something here real quick? We can deport someone to El Salvador. What happens when they get to El Salvador is generally up to
He covers that.
El Salvador.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
covers that.
To El Salvador, how to handle the process for their own citizens. Again, what you seem to be asking us to do is to change the government and the laws of El Salvador. So if we deport somebody back to, for example, Syria, should we be closely involved on a day-to-day basis with the Syrian government, detailing that person's life and future? If we deport, say, 100,000 people back to Haiti, should we open a case file on each of those 100,000 people and ask every day, what's their housing situation? What's their healthcare situation? What might they need? What might they want? Once someone's out of our country, that becomes the problem of their host country, not our country. These people chose to invade us. So there's a lot of concern from the corporate media about the invaders, but they chose to invade us. It's our responsibility to return them back to where they came from or another country willing to take them.
Let me pause this real quick. I wanted, this is, and he's going to get into this more, so I won't do too much of it, of the process, but this goes into what Whitfield asked, and question is, why does this process need a lawyer and tens of thousands of dollars and a letter from a federal politician to get it through that process? Well, listen, here's one thing that we want to be able to establish. The reason why, like Chris Murphy and other people are absolutely full of crap, right, is Donald Trump didn't just walk down the street, decide he didn't like this guy and deported him. There actually was a whole process whereby our immigration system, law enforcement, attorneys, everybody was involved, and nobody's disputing the fact that this guy is in the country illegally. That's not up for debate. He's in the country illegally. Okay, so now can we deport him? Well, again, you see the press, they're more concerned about this whole idea of, well, what happens when he gets home? It's like, you do realize we're not, the United States government, and more specifically, because this goes to your point, the United States taxpayer is not responsible for what happens to every other citizen in every other part of the world. That's not our responsibility. Doesn't mean you can care about it. You can want the best for them. In fact, all of these reporters, you know what they could do? They could all go down to El Salvador and they could protest outside the prison. Right? They could send money for his legal defense team. They could do all of that, but they don't want to do it with their money. They don't want to do it with their time. They want to do it with ours. And so, do you have to have a process to distinguish between who's in the country legally and who is not? Yes. Do you have to have a process for deporting someone that once you've identified that they are in the country legally? Yes. And so that's why it costs something, but it's just amazing to me how the left have decided that this is the hill. This is the true fight. This is the thing that American citizens are truly worried about. And that is, are we really doing enough for this guy that came here illegally and that the Trump administration has identified as part of a terror organization? Are we really doing enough for them? It's, again, I'll let Stephen talk more about it, but it just blows my mind. Okay, go ahead.
Yep.
Can anyone here tell me what would happen to the illegal alien from El Salvador if he came back to the United States? Does anyone here know? Does anyone want to guess? Any of you?
He could be with his family.
Pause.
Does any of you?
This whole thing where it's he could be with his family. Okay, let me just say, in 2021, his wife Jennifer Vasquez, in 2021, accused him of being a repeat wife beater, and it was in a legal court filing saying that she's afraid of him. She has multiple photos of how violent he can be, and she has bruises. He's left her black and blue and bleeding. He's thrown laptop at her. He's kicked her with his boots. He's done all of these things in this court filing. Now she's coming out being like, oh, it's like the typical battered wife syndrome where it's like, oh no, I'm going to have to plea for him to come back now. So you know how sometimes a woman will call the police because she's getting beaten by her husband and doesn't want to die. And then when the police show up, the husband gets taken and she's like, don't take my husband. That's basically what you have going on now. But she filed back then that he did all of these horrible things to her. And it has been a repeat situation. She even acknowledged that he was part of MS-13 in her court filing. Like all of these things. Okay. So this reporter is like, oh, he could go back with his family. Oh, you mean the family he was beating the crap out of? You want to send this monster back home so that he can beat his wife and kids again? Really? Man, the left they just don't quit with this stuff.
So this gets better. So
again, bring everyone back to the video real quick, because that was a good point that Tina needed to bring up. But to bring everyone back to the point, they said, because again, this is part of what the press has suggested. Well, didn't the Supreme Court order you to bring him back? And so Stephen Miller is framing up this question of, okay, he's in the country illegally. Everyone agrees on that. If we bring back an illegal alien, what exactly do we do with him? And the press shouts out, well, he could be with his family. Go ahead and hit play.
You know the answer to the question. Legally, what would happen if he came back here? Does any of you know? Any of you? You've been writing. I'm talking now. You need to stop. I'm talking now. Does any of you?
Why was it unanimous?
You're done. Does any of you know the answer to the question? Does any of you? You've been talking about it for days.
Would deport him again, no?
He would be arrested.
Okay.
He'd be put in confinement. He would be deported the second time to El Salvador again, because there's no withholding order for an alien who's a member of a foreign terrorist organization, number one. Number two is the gang that he's a member of doesn't exist in El Salvador anymore. So what you're asking for is to be deported twice. But additionally, if we chose to just pretend that the withholding order was real, he would be deported to a different country. So, for example, he could be deported to Egypt. So I'm just trying to understand, is it your view, in other words, you have to find a country that would be willing to take a MS-13 member from El Salvador. So I'm trying to understand from you all is, so if he came back and under our laws, he was then deported to Egypt or to Somalia, would you then be saying, great, I'm so glad that you deported him to another country? Is that what you'd all be saying? Like, do you understand our immigration laws at all?
Pause.
But the premise of your question,
this is one of the things I love about Stephen Miller is when he does these things, is because so many problems with people on the right when they talk to the press is they always assume that the press will ask a loaded question. They will ask a question with a faulty presupposition, or they will ask a question assuming something to be true. They will be begging the question in their question. And you have people on the right that just, well, I'm going to try to answer it as best I can. No. What Stephen Miller does here, when first of all he shuts someone down, he's like, no, I'm asking you a question now because you have been reporting on something, and at this point it had been for 72 hours. You've been reporting on something for 72 hours. Do you even know what the process would be if we did what you're all saying we should? Do you know what it would be? And then what do they want to do? They want to ask a different question. Why? Because they want to deflect. Because this is not about getting the actual perspective, understanding, or argument from the administration on what they did and why. This is about pushing a narrative. And so the moment the press gets in trouble, they jump to the next thing. And Miller doesn't let them do it. Miller says, no. You wanted to talk about this. You have been talking about it. You've been telling the American people something that is going on that we fundamentally disagree with your caricature of what just took place. And so now I want to ask you, let's assume for a second we did exactly what you wanted. What do you think would happen next? And none of them know, because it wasn't important for them to know, because it wasn't important for them to understand the actual process. What was important for them was to try to make the Trump administration look bad. Now, good luck trying to do that with Stephen Miller, because he will clearly crush you in the debate.
My favorite thing about what he's subtly doing here is that Miller is effectively exposing that the reporters and Democratic politicians are using proceduralism as kind of the Trojan horse to smuggle in open borders, is what they actually really want. So they're talking about the Constitution, they're talking about due process, they're talking about the Supreme Court, and they're basically saying all these norms are being violated. And he's saying, if we follow the process that you're outlining, do you know where this ends up? What they actually want is to end up in a situation where we have open borders, we have people that come in, and we have them stay here permanently. He's basically he's calling their bluff and saying, you don't actually want to, he's saying that, like, well, we could just send him to Egypt if we follow your process. He knows, and they know, that they don't want him sent to Egypt. What they really want is for him to permanently stay here. Yeah. That's actually really what they want. They want open borders. They want anybody from around the world to walk up to the United States, claim asylum, and enter this country. Anyone, any of the 7 billion people in this country should be free, in these people's minds, to fly to Mexico, walk up to the U.S. border, claim asylum, come into this country, and be able to permanently stay here. Yeah. That's what they want.
Unless, of course, those people all end up in Chicago, Washington, D.C., New York City, Philadelphia, and then all of a sudden they're like, well, what are we going to do with all these people here? We can't afford, we need more money. Like, well, no. You said you wanted this. This is the other part that the American people are fed up with, is because one of the things that busing people from Texas to New York City demonstrated was that none of them believe their own crap the moment they have to live with the consequences of it. The moment they're actually impacted by the results of their stated policy positions, all of a sudden something has to be done. It's like you're the one that created these conditions. And now that we force you to live under the conditions you've created, you don't like it. But instead of actually engaging in just the slightest bit of introspection and saying, gosh, maybe there actually is a practical point to what the other side is saying. No, what they try to do is, to your point, they bring up proceduralism. They try to say, well, no, the issue is this. Okay, well, again, not a good faith argument, because I know what you really think about the United States Constitution. I know what you really think about this whole process. You've made your objectives very, very clear. You've manipulated the legal process in order to attain your objectives. And now you're trying to pretend that it's something that it's not. And I don't believe you anymore.
I think Stephen Miller does a really good job exposing these quote unquote journalists for not really engaging in journalism. Yeah. He's highlighting the fact that they couldn't even be bothered to find out the difference between these different procedures. They couldn't even be bothered to do a little bit of research because they were so busy propaganda peddling that that the only motivation they have is a gotcha political question. It's all about how can we get hearts and minds back on our side. And it's purely for propaganda purposes. They don't care about journalism. And that's one of the big issues and one of the big upheavals in this administration has been like, let's get back to real journalism that isn't a bunch of garbage propaganda being shoved down everybody's throats. And he's really good at highlighting the difference here. And clearly, everyone here asking him all of these questions are only interested in advancing their propaganda, not fact-finding.
He's debating like 7 journalists right now and kicking the hell out of all of them. Loyal to Law said they freaking kicked out the illegals from Martha's Vineyard not even 3 days into it. It's like, exactly. Martha's Vineyard would have been a perfect test case in saying, okay, this is comprised of a bunch of people that believe in sanctuary cities, that believe in open borders, that believe that diversity is our strength no matter what, right? With no sort of caveats or context. Okay, great. Here's a bunch of what you say is good for the country. So why within 3 days does Martha's Vineyard solve its illegal immigrant problem? Because they don't want it in their backyard, because it is not about what they say it's about. This is about the accumulation and concentration of political power. That's what this is about. And anyway, I want to keep listening to Stephen here because he just
gentlemen, the return, guys. Do you know the difference between a deportation order and a withholding order? Do you know the difference? Any of you, please. Do you?
Well, we're not in the government.
But you couldn't even spend 72 hours over the weekend learning the distinction, even though you've been writing and talking about it this whole time. Just raise your hand. Does any of you know the difference between a deportation order and a withholding order?
How do you know that he's a member of M13?
See?
According to our government and his government. In other words, his government has confirmed based on their own intelligence that he's a member of MS-13. First of all, do you dispute that he's an illegal alien?
What's that?
Do you dispute that he's an illegal alien?
No.
Okay. And do you dispute that as an illegal alien, we have the right to deport him?
Notice the dead silence.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I can't get over is the fact that they will say, according to intelligence, well, where's your proof? And it's like, the proof is his government and our government both have identified him as MS-13. Well, where's your proof that proof is actual proof? I mean, they just kind of keep circling back around that. I want to know that the proof that you're providing is legitimate, and I need proof in order to know that's legitimate.
Well, and even if you gave it to them, they'd say, "Well, we don't like that. We don't like that particular proof." But the point
he's
here,
giving them proof, but they want proof of the proof.
The bigger point is he just exposed what they really want when he said, "Do you dispute that he's an illegal alien?" And they say, "No." Do you dispute that we have a right to deport him?
And
Silence.
then they go silent. And this is critical. This is critical because all of the talk about MS-13, all of the talk about criminal gangs, all the talk about all of that is actually secondary to the primary point here. And Stephen's about to crush them with it. So go ahead.
And he went through the legal process. So I want to be very what I'm getting from this conversation, which is educational for me, is that not one person in the media knows the difference between a deportation order and a withholding order. Is that a fair statement? You're learning about this all for the first time right now? I guess so. Okay. So a deportation order means the judge has said he must be deported from the country. He has no right to remain here any longer. He must be removed from the country. So his only options are to be deported to his home country or another country. That's it. There's no other option. He doesn't get to stay here. He doesn't get to live here. He has no future here. He has no right to be here. He's an illegal alien. So when you keep saying return, because you've been spun up by the open borders advocates, you all seem to be operating under the illusion that he would be able to come to the United States and just continue to live here illegally. That's not an option available to him. His only choices in life are to live in El Salvador or to live in another country. That's it. There's no other option, legally or otherwise, because he came to our country illegally. Do you understand that?
Can I ask, as a matter of policy, does the administration believe that immigration judges, because they're under DOJ, that their orders can be overruled by what the administration wants? Is that a general matter of policy?
Well, actually, so specifically, it's the Attorney General has authority to overrule the immigration courts, and that's actually by statute. Yes,
by statute.
So this is important to understand. do you notice how the question was framed, right? The question was framed, do you believe that the administration has the ability to overrule an immigration judge? And what he just pointed out, he goes, well, the attorney general, because again, an immigration judge, you don't think of a judge as in the sense that you get arrested of something as an American citizen, you go to court and a judge is overseeing like a fair trial, right? This is a judge that has a responsibility to make certain determinations based off of federal law and U.S. policy, right? And so by statute, what by statute means is that it's actually in the law that the attorney general has the power to overrule an immigration judge in these particular cases. And part of that has to do with respect to the executive branch's responsibility to enforce immigration policy and conduct foreign policy, because there's two issues here. One is immigration, one is foreign policy. The immigration part is, hey, you're not a citizen, you're here illegally. The foreign policy component actually also adds into the whole. And turns out we believe that you're a member of an international terrorist organization. And guess who also believes that? Your country, right? So foreign policy, immigration policy. So that's the reason why things like that are written into the statute. And so once again, you're looking at some of this going, well, golly gee willikers, members of the press, did you forget to add any of that into your reporting? Go on to next part.
Other questions?
Stephen, on the gold card, the president and Secretary Lutnick have suggested they're lining up applicants already. How many people do you expect to be tagged to this program when the president announces it this week, if he actually announces it this week?
I'll let Secretary Lutnick provide that update, but I appreciate that.
Is it the White House administration's goal to deport 1 million undocumented or illegally?
No, much more than that.
Stephen, also of the 10 alleged gang members that Secretary Rubio said were sent to El Salvador over the weekend, what sort of due process did they get as mandated by the Supreme Court?
Well, you're talking about the alien enemies?
Yes, the alien.
So first of all, a number of those are MS-13. So again, those are just standard removals of El Salvadorians to El Salvador. And without
what evidence did you provide that they were MS-13?
Okay, so
members?
we seem to be confused about this. Illegal aliens from El Salvador, again, get deported to El Salvador. Do you all appreciate that like tens of thousands of El Salvadorians have been deported to El Salvador? You seem to be under the impression that El Salvadorians living in our country illegally just get to stay here. They don't. They get arrested and deported. Then the fact that they're MS-13 just puts an extra priority on our deporting them. But we would deport someone to El Salvador regardless of whether or not they were MS-13 if they were here illegally. That's just an extra, because of the priority on public safety threats, we're emphasizing the removals of gang members, in this case, foreign terrorist organization gang members. But as to your other question, they went through all of the due process, as you would call it, that is required by law. So, what I find so mystifying is that I've been talking to you all for a very long time. I legitimately, going back years actually, in my entire professional life, I've never received this many questions from the media about an American who was raped or murdered by an illegal alien. Like, legitimately never. And all of you who are enjoying your lives and doing quite well, if you had children and you were living near any of these people, you would move away immediately. You would call the police immediately. You would call us and ask us to make you and your family safer immediately. And you thank your lucky stars every night that you have enough means and enough money not to live in communities where, say, illegal alien pedophiles offend and reoffend and keep reoffending and keep reoffending. The expression there, but for the grace of God, go I. The Biden administration apprehended 2 illegal aliens from Venezuela. They were trained to Aragua. A lot more than 2, but the story I'm telling is 2. And they decided they were entitled to an enormous amount of due process. And they didn't feel they had enough evidence to just deport them right away. So they put them on a monitoring system known as supervised release. You're familiar with this case. But a few weeks later, they kidnapped a young girl named Jocelyn Nungary, who was 12 years old at the time. I'm sure you've seen pictures of her. Just the most perfect girl you could possibly imagine. And her mother loved her very much. She was tied up, savagely beaten, stripped naked, tortured to death, murdered. Her body was dumped into a lake. So she didn't get any due process, but I'll tell you who did are the 2 illegal aliens from Venezuela who stole her forever. And there's stories like that all over the country. We just arrested a pedophile illegal alien who is being shielded by Sanctuary City, who's been charged in 20 sex crimes against children. None of you, any of you have ever had the chance to spend time with victims' families whose children have been raped or whose wives have been raped and murdered. But if that doesn't break your heart, nothing will. I know that we have some people, like Killer Lawrence, who fantasize about assassinations and things like that. But in the civilized society, the power of the state is used to keep innocent people alive and to keep innocent women and children from being hurt. This administration is never going to apologize for using the power of the state to keep men, women, and children from being savagely murdered and beaten. If we release known and suspected MS-13 and Tren de Aragua, and then there's another Jocelyn Nungri, then whose responsibility is that going to be? You think that we're going to sit around wringing our hands, wondering if, maybe we should, release this person, give them a little bit of extra time, give them a little bit extra chance to plead their case, and then what? They kidnap somebody, they slit their throat, they shoot them in the head, and we say, well, at least the illegal alien got due process. They're here illegally. The only place that they deserve to go is to some country other than our country. And it's not a statistic. These are real lives. These are real families. There's whole neighborhoods in Los Angeles controlled by illegal alien Mexican street gangs. Entire neighborhoods where you have to live in fear because of individuals here illegally engaged in extortion and crime. Not to mention the fentanyl. You have cartels that have functional control over the entire northern territory in Mexico who are pumping fentanyl, lacing our drugs with this chemical. Children are ending up dead. They're going out to a weekend party. They think they're taking something safe and they get a heart attack and they die by the thousands. So we're not going to apologize for doing something about that. And I just wish we lived in a country where the media gave to 1/10 a damn as much about Americans who were murdered and brutalized and savagely killed, beaten to death, as they did about whether illegal aliens that we all agree are illegal aliens should get 1 million days in court and 1 million trials and 1 million this and 1 million that. There's 15 million illegal aliens that violently enter the country. If every one of them got the trial that you're asking for, it would take us centuries to remove them. Centuries. We'd be talking about this in 300-400 years. Their great-great-great-grandchildren would be the ones representing them in court. That's how long it would take. Illegal aliens who come to our country have to be removed, and they have to be removed quickly. That is an essential component of having something that we like to call a country.
Stephen,
One last.
Dang.
I know. I love how he just proceeds to just take their lunch money right there.
Yeah, no, he does. It was a woodshed moment, but
it was a long clip. But I mean, I hope our audience understands why we had to play the whole thing.
Yeah, and we've already got people in the chat. Are you going to bleep out the when he uses the word pedophile because it could potentially impact the how far they push it out. I don't know. We'll see. I don't want to. We typically don't.
What? So
and the reason why. Well, look, here's what I think is so important about what he said. Is one of the things that I have seen over multiple years of debating these issues in a legislature, is because it always goes back to things like this. It always goes back to they will have a particular use case that they want to use, or they will have a particular scenario that they want to use, and they will draft an entire narrative around the most sympathetic scenario possible. And then when it comes to us, we want to argue, purely esoteric principles, or we want to argue, well, this is important with respect to, protecting borders or things like, that's all true. But here's why we have those things. The reason why we have those things is because the whole reason why you form a country is because a civilization, a group of people, a society has decided that they want to live a certain way, that they want to have certain laws which govern that society, that they want to have certain institutions which are responsible for both protecting their rights, protecting their property, and facilitating a high trust society. That's why we do it. That's why countries are formed, right? It's specifically why our country was formed. And if you look at the whole course of human history, actual citizens had far more to say and far more input with respect to how this country would be formed, would be organized, would be run than most and throughout all of human history. And it's this idea of, okay, what is the government's responsibility? I certainly don't think it's to run our lives. I certainly don't think it's to micromanage the economy. I don't think it's to micromanage my healthcare. I don't think it's to indoctrinate my children. I don't think it's to do any of those things. You know what I do think it is? I do think it is to do something like protect the borders of our country and protect our citizens. And I understand and will completely admit that, yes, the vast majority of people that come to this country, to include illegally, do not commit crimes like this, right? We all acknowledge that. Nobody's making that argument. But many do, and there is something especially infuriating about finding out that your child, your wife, your father, whoever it was the victim of a crime that is in and of itself a manifestation of injustice. But then to find out that it was by someone that was here illegally, or to find out that it was somebody who was here illegally, that your government knew was here illegally, that your local police force, local mayor, and local board of supervisors sheltered from deportation, who may have been, in the case of Fairfax County and their little Commonwealth attorney up there, Descano, apprehended, arrested, and then released because ideologues wanted to push a political narrative. And that is how your loved one became a victim of a crime. Somebody came into the country illegally. Your government identified it. It's not that they were unaware. We all understand that obviously law enforcement can't be everywhere all at once. Obviously, you can't be protected from every sort of crime that could potentially take place. But the number of crimes that were entirely preventable by the government taking its border security response seriously, by your local governments not engaging in ideological nonsense and absurdity and letting people that they had already apprehended back out. That's the part that the American people, I think, have just become completely done with. And yet, as we present all of this evidence, and Stephen Miller has done it here beautifully. I think that's the entire part. He's answered the questions about due process. He's answered the questions and the distinction between a withholding order and a deportation order. He's answered the questions with respect to border security and policy. He's answered all of it. And then at the end, what does he do? He goes, you guys have never demonstrated the same amount of frustration or moral outrage about innocent Americans being brutalized by people who are in this country illegally. You always rush. You selectively pick the stories that you think are going to advance your political agenda, and you ignore the victims. And you do it repeatedly. And this is where we're at. We're at this point right now where I look at these arguments and I have a hard time. It used to be that I would look at these arguments, I would say, that's stupid, that's absurd, that's ridiculous, right? I would look at the merit of the actual argument presented and I would say, yeah, there's something fundamentally flawed with that argument. But now when I look at the mountain of evidence that has been presented, when I look at these sort of things happening over and over and over again, now when I hear these questions and I look at the way that they selectively curate the news or curate information in such a way as to push something while ignoring the victims, I look at them like, you know what? I don't like you. It's not just your argument. And look, I am obligated as a Christian to fundamentally at some level love humanity. Right? Love anyone made in the image of God. And I will stay committed to that because it's a command, not a request. But man, you're making it hard. Man, you're making it hard. Because the sort of ideology that drives people to prioritize this over a little girl that gets brutally beaten and murdered, over somebody that gets trafficked. I'm looking at you and like, I will tell you this much. I wish you the best. I don't even want to share a country with you.
Let alone with the illegal immigrants.
It is.
I've gotten to that point.
And they wonder why everyone hates the media now. They wonder why we have a knee-jerk reaction to despise the media and to distrust them is because not only do they constantly lie to us about all manner of things. I mean, we watched them cover up the fact that Biden was basically losing his mind. We watched them gaslight us about COVID. That we watched them silence people that were legitimate and elevate people that were peddling propaganda. We watched them ignore, child rapists and these horrible, horrible criminals and ignore these things happening to American citizens. We watch them do all of that and then prop up, whatever they want to prop up. After watching this for eons, it's no wonder that legacy media is dying. This is their death rattle, and this is what they've chosen their death rattle to be on.
It's because they're not look, they got ideologically captured, and it's just, we finally called their bluff. I don't know what else to say. Like, what Stephen Miller has exposed in, 10, 15 minutes of us watching this is that there is not even an element. The left uses proceduralism in pursuit of a political agenda. It's not proceduralism for proceduralism's sake. For the longest time, certainly the entire time I've been involved in politics, my entire adult professional life, I've seen Republicans adhere to words on paper for the sake of the words on the paper. Not for their own sakes politically, but because we believe in these systems. We're going to defend these systems. We need to protect the, institutional guardrails. The left doesn't give a damn about institutional guardrails. They don't actually care about the Constitution. They don't care about the rule of law. They don't care about checks and balances. They don't care about federalism. They don't care about setting precedent. They do not care about Robert's Rules of Order. They wouldn't even hear your bills when you introduced them this year.
130 Republican bills received no testimony, received no consideration, received no debate, and received no vote. Where was their passion for democracy and deliberative processes then? It didn't exist. Why? Because it wasn't beneficial for them. It wasn't beneficial for them to hear bills that they would have had to vote no on because of the ideological capture that's taking place within their own mind. And the last thing they wanted to do was have it go up in the public for everybody to see, so that when I come back and say this is what they believe and I get told no, they don't, I wanted to be able to point to the video and say, really? Listen to this testimony by this mother whose daughter was trafficked, and then listen and then watch how they vote. And then you tell me they don't want it. But no, they wouldn't even give it a hearing.
What they're so terrified about, and I want to briefly go through, we talked about this a little bit, but I want to show some other examples of what they're doing, because it's not just Cory Booker and Chris Van Hollen that are talking about this. Like, all levels of the Democratic Party in elected office and outside elected office are making this a major issue. Like, this is the hill that they want to die on. Yeah. This is the current thing for them right now. So here's some examples. Here's somebody that's a state representative in Pennsylvania, actually ran for statewide office and got crushed last year, but let's leave that aside. Disappearing people without any due process is fascism. Full stop. I'm sick to my stomach, and we all should be. 44,000 likes. Here's another state representative in Tennessee. This is one of the guys who was actually expelled from the chamber, and then immediately got reelected by his Democrat constituency in Nashville. Fascism is here. Our neighbors, like Kilmar Ábrego García, are being kidnapped and sent to a foreign detention camp. Wannabe dictators Trump and Bukele have defied the Supreme Court's order to facilitate his return. First off, Bukele's under no obligation to obey a Supreme Court ruling from the United States. He's a foreign president of another country. Yeah. He's sovereign.
By the way, Nashville, this is your representative. Great job.
This is a disgusting moment, and we must sound the alarm. Here's our good friend Robert Reich here. If Trump can claim a national emergency to disappear legal residents without due process, what's to stop him from doing the same to U.S. citizens who oppose him? Again, like, this is no one is safe. Fascism. Not even people legally here in the country, possibly not even American citizens. Fascism is here. I've got news for you, Robert Reich, Justin Jones, and Malcolm Kenyatta. If deporting illegal immigrants who have connections to MS-13, who have no right to be here, who should have been deported 5 years ago, better yet, who should have never gotten here in the first place, is fascism, then I voted for fascism. I'm Matt Walsh. Have you checked what Matt Walsh's here, let's find out. Let's
That could be clipped. I'm not for fascism.
Here's
the thing is, they're wrong.
There's Matt Walsh. There's his bio. And you know why he has that as his bio?
Because it's become a joke.
Because it's become a joke. Do I want to control the railroads? Do I want to invade Ethiopia? No, I don't.
It's because they're calling something fascism that isn't fascism, and I don't ever want to yield ground on it and be like, oh, well, then I'm a fascist.
What else? You know what else? I'm not going to recoil when a particular word is thrown my way
No,
from
that's
people that
fine,
have no
but
for
you
people
don't
who have
own,
no
don't
respect
own a word that isn't a
for-
word you own.
for people who have no respect for the Constitution to then invoke the Constitution in order for them to get a desired political outcome. I'm going to call your bluff. For people who invoke due process, invoke rule of law, invoke precedent setting, who have shown us through COVID, showed us through BLM riots, showed us through the entire Biden administration that they have no respect for these things whatsoever. The Democratic Party has spent my entire lifetime telling us that the Constitution is an outdated document written by evil, white, slave-owning men that needs to be chucked aside. They have said that for 30 years. I remember sitting in college classes, hearing those same exact arguments, and then for them to have the gall to invoke these things, not for the sake of these things, but for the sake of a desired political outcome. And what is that desired political outcome? The dissolving of my country, the eradication of national borders, the importation of anybody who wants to walk into my country from anywhere in the world. If these people have their way, 7 billion people can walk up to the border in the United States, claim asylum, and come in and permanently stay here. And there's nothing that could be done to remove them.
Except
Even if
for-
they
the
don't.
problem
Except,
with
wait. Except for Martha's Vineyard. They'll remove them from Martha's Vineyard immediately.
The problem with some of the language here, okay, is when you're throwing things out there like fascism, when you're talking about, well, when they say what you're doing is unconstitutional. Let me finish my thought because I can see you winding up. When they say that you're ignoring the Constitution and we got to defend our Constitution, my initial thought, like, I get it. They don't care about the Constitution and the whole deal, but it doesn't even matter whether they care about the Constitution or not, because what they are saying is actually factually wrong. Like, it's not that we're doing anything against the Constitution. And so it's kind of like, it's this idea of, no, first of all, refute what they're saying because it's not true, and then say they have no leg to stand on. Same with the fascism thing. We are not fascists. It's not true. They're gaslighting again. And so that's just it. Is I always want to default on the whole, look, what they're saying is a lie. They're lying again. They're lying again about the Constitution. They're lying about fascism. They're lying about this guy's legal status. They're lying about what's important. They're lying about the process. They're lying about all of it. And that is where I feel like the focus should be. We shouldn't be sitting here being like, but you didn't care about it when it was you. It's like, no, the whataboutism doesn't get us anywhere. They're lying again. They're lying again.
I think, look, the most ironic thing about them throwing around the word fascism is it's in the case of some of these state legislators who I've seen before, they have no idea what fascism is. Fascism is some idea. Robert Reich knows better. He throws it around because he finds it politically useful. Like, some of them are, so I'm going to disagree with Tina on one thing here. I think some of them are not lying. I think they're legitimately idiots. I think others, like Robert Reich, are just deliberately lying. What's fascinating, and I did this once at a college campus. I read off like 10 quotes, and 6 or 7 of them, I pulled from the Italian Fascist Manifesto and the Manifesto of the Nazi Party. And I said, I'm just going to read these off. You tell me right wing, left wing. You know, what do you guys as college students, as people who are thinking about this, studying about it, what would you consider these things to be? Every single fascist quote I read off, they listed as left wing, and that's. Again, it's one of those things where the word fascism, they only utilize it. They don't utilize it because they're trying to inform. They utilize it because it has political utility. And that's what this entire thing, that's what Stephen Miller so wonderfully demonstrated in what he was saying. And the reason why I am always going to push back significantly on the whole, fine, if this is that, then that's what I voted for. This isn't that. This isn't fascism. And I'm not going to allow them to try to implant the seed in people's minds that this is what actually happened. And yeah, it gets frustrating to have to repeatedly call it out all the time, but I'm going to continue to do so because I'm not going to be branded. I'm not going to be branded with an ideology that is far more in line with what they want than anything I would want. What this is, very, very simply, and again, I don't think I could say it better than the way Stephen Miller did. What this is very simply is we have, and this is important to understand, it's not just a political party. It's a political movement because it crosses borders, funny enough, no pun intended. If you look over at the UK right now, they seem to be far more concerned with rounding up somebody that flies a Union Jack, which is the British flag, right, at a parade that might offend somebody. They're far more concerned with what Grandpa said on X than they are with actually tracking down the perpetrators of a grooming and rape gang. Right? You look at this whole Netflix special of adolescence where it's like, oh yeah, the real problem in England right now is the rise of toxic masculinity, and they've orchestrated this entire series around a 13-year-old boy who was listening too much to toxic masculinity and decided to brutally kill and stab his sister. The thing is where they grabbed inspiration for that story, it wasn't a 13-year-old English boy, it was an immigrant. But Netflix can't post that, and Keir Starmer is actually pushing this Netflix series into schools all over the country because we're going to really educate our students on what the real problem is. It's like, really, you guys have a Pakistani grooming gang in your country that's been operating for years with relative impunity, but this is what you're going to focus on? And the answer is yes, because that's what they believe. And so you see similar things up in Canada right now. All right, so can we just come to the conclusion of something? They're going to call us fascists. They're going to say we're violating due process. They're going to say that we are violating the Constitution. They're going to say that we're simply violating all of these things. Why? Is it because these are standards that they hold up as true and something that they believe should be consistently applied across the board in order to ensure equality before the law? No. And the reason why we know that's not true is not just because of what the left and what the woke left specifically is doing in the United States. It's because of what the woke left is doing in the United States and the UK and South Korea and Germany and France, right? And Canada. This is what they believe, guys. And so understand something. They already told us what they believe. Go read Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. Saul Alinsky laid out in his 13 rules exactly how you utilize somebody else's values against them. You don't adopt their value. Oh my gosh, the moment you adopt their values, now there's a standard to which you can be held to account. They don't want that. No, every time they call you a fascist, it's not because they have any real problem with state control of the economy. They love that. They want more of it. It's because they know you don't want it. And so now it's the utilization of our values against us so that they can concentrate power and then immediately overthrow our values. And the problem right now is we still have people on our side that don't get it.
And that's why I said, Nick, because I like Nick and Tina were getting uncomfortable when I was saying this. I just want to point out everything I said is no different than what Matt Walsh has on his own.
I also
Twitter bio.
disagree with Matt Walsh.
I also disagree with Matt Walsh for that.
But I'm not saying that you have to agree with me, right? I'm not saying that the solution is for us to go full Matt Walsh here. But do you get the frustration of I am not going to allow evil people to use principles that they don't believe in order to win? You know what a core component
of
my...
I don't see how that does that.
Yes.
Hang on, guys.
I don't see how that is...
Hang on. You know what a core component of my principles also entails? Defeating the left. And at the end of the day, one of the reasons that I pulled this Stephen Miller clip to just circle back around to, like, you know, getting outside the debate of terminology here, to just go back to the general topic of illegal immigration. The reason that I pulled up this Stephen Miller clip and that we went through this is because I believe that Stephen Miller did a phenomenal job of exposing the hidden agenda here, which is these people are not interested in defending rule of law. They're not interested in defending due process, and they're not interested in defending the Constitution. They're interested in using those things in order to get a desired political outcome.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they're in power, they will discard these things as tools of white supremacy, right?
Yes.
As
I know
evil,
we've covered this.
hegemonic concepts.
No.
But the second that they're not in power,
yes,
they will appeal to these things in order to defend what? In order to defend a desired political outcome. So the thing that's consistent here, and it's taken us 10 years to get to this point on the right, because we on the right have been so obsessed with the process and procedure because we thought these things are important in of themselves. What the left has realized is they're not important in of themselves. They're obstacles most of the time. Sometimes they're used as assets. And what we need to do is realize that we are not dealing in good faith with people who have a shared moral or philosophical worldview with us. We're dealing with monsters who will twist words in order to get a desired outcome. There are no principles. There's just the pursuit of power.
Which is why taking and allowing them to go ahead and brand you and then receiving the brand is probably not a good idea.
And it's also probably not a good idea to be terrified of what these people have to say about us. The point that I'm trying to get across...
There is nobody that's terrified of them calling us a racist, a fascist, or a bigot.
Really?
No, none of us are terrified of that. What I am concerned with is allowing them to brand, to give us a brand, and then us receiving the brand like a freaking moron. No. It's not about being terrified. It's about looking at something and thinking it's absolutely absurd.
I think that the last 10 years of American politics, the right has been terrified of whatever the left calls them.
Okay, but that is not why I dislike the term fascist being used on us. And it's also not why I don't identify as a bigot or a racist or anything like that. I'm not going to take the brand that they want to give me and then own it as my own. That's absolutely absurd. And I'm going to continue to put the truth out there and counter what they're saying instead of just going, fine, if that's what you're going to call me, then call me. No, I refuse to do it. I will die on this freaking hill because the truth deserves to be defended and language has meaning. And as long as it has meaning and I see that it has meaning, I don't care if it has meaning for them or not. I'm going to continue under what I know to be true. And therefore, I will never call myself a fascist. I will never say that fascist, oh, good, then I'm a That is stupid. That is absolutely absurd. And I will not yield on that.
Look, all that I'm saying, and I'll leave it at this. All that I'm saying is I'm not going to allow the other side to throw around words in order to dissuade me from doing what needs to be done. That's all that I'm saying. I want to win.
That's fine. None of us were saying you should.
The point is, I'm also not going to be misidentified. I'm also not going to be misrepresented for what I believe. I'm not going to have someone lie about me and accept the lie. I'm neither going to be afraid of the lie, nor will I be defined by it. I will confront it, and then I will argue for the truth. That's what I'll do. And that's why I will always, I'm with Tita, that I always have an issue with this idea that, well, we'll show them, we'll just demonstrate that we don't care what they call us. Well, I think it's fine to demonstrate that you don't care what they call you. I think it's something else to then revel in to demonstrate to them that you don't care so much that you'll even accept the lie about yourself because you know it's a lie. Okay, well, but part of the problem with this is that ultimately there's a lot of people that are either waking up to this or seeing it for the first time or starting to realize, the inaccuracies. And the last thing I want to do is give anybody the impression that there's any element of truth about what the left is saying on these things. I want to be able to clearly articulate what's wrong with it and why, and then I want to be able to present a counter argument based off of what we really are. And I think that's incredible. It's a core part of what I think we're trying to do here, or at least I know what I want us to be trying to do here. Because everything that was just mentioned, and especially the argument that Steve Miller gave, what I think was so effective about it is that there's going to be some people that have just, the woke mind virus, and that's become a popular term, but I also think it's an accurate depiction of what we're seeing when somebody actually gets to the point where it almost is like they're incapable of processing information in any sort of logical way anymore because they have become convinced of the critical theory, oppressor-oppressed distinction, and that's what defines everything through them. That it is a worldview which will permit no other interpretation of reality. And the end result is that they can no longer process information. But most people have not been stung by that. Most people are not afflicted by that. There may be elements of what they see being said when it comes to things like due process, and they think to themselves, well, yeah, I like the idea of due process. And of course, I don't want the executive branch to be able to deport somebody that's here legally. There seems to be something wrong with that. Now, I can respond to that by saying, well, I don't care. Or I can admire what Stephen Miller here just did. It was not only systematic, in a relatively short period of time, systematically destroy not only the arguments that were being made, calls out the accusations in the form of questions, demonstrates that they're not only wrong along the moral categories of what we should be focused on and what our priorities should be, but they're actually wrong within their own criteria that they set about due process. I think there's a lot of people that watch an exchange like that and think to themselves, you know what, that made sense. I wasn't sure what I thought about this because all I heard was, you know, what I listened to on CNN as I was walking on my way to my plane. But something didn't seem right, and now I understand why I was correct. And that will never. Well, actually, I shouldn't say that. We could get to a moment in this country, we could get to a moment within our society where it no longer matters whether or not you actually make a good argument. And I've been in situations like that. In Iraq, I didn't show up to places to make a really good argument. And they didn't put bombs on the side of the road to make a really good argument. We had just gotten to the point where one of us was going to win and that was it. And I know exactly what it means to operate in that environment. And I can tell you right now, I wanted as far away from where I live as possible. And so I'm very grateful when Stephen Miller gets up there and says, no, I'm not going to accept whether it's a lie, whether it's an objective that I disagree with, whether it's a good faith argument that I disagree with. I'm not going to accept a faulty premise. I'm not going to accept bad definitions. I'm not going to accept you mislabeling something. I'm going to correct that. I'm going to show you where our argument is actually correct. And then I'm also going to show you the moral imperative of why we're doing this. Because what Stephen Miller did so brilliantly at the end of this is he took all of the legal arguments, all of the logical arguments, all of the esoteric concepts about borders and countries and nations, and then he boiled it down. He's like, fine, you want a good emotional appeal, because emotional appeals are not bad. They're especially useful when they are backed up by facts, evidence, and logical consistency. And he did all of that, but then he brought it down to the case of a 12-year-old girl that not a single one of these reporters seemed to care about. At what point do you care? He's convinced you legally that he's correct. He's convinced you logically he's correct. He's made a good, principled, esoteric argument with respect to the concept of nations and immigration policy and foreign policy. He's convinced you there, or he's at least presented a sufficient argument to be able to convince a reasonable person that he's correct. Fine, let's break it down to the brass tacks of what all of this means. A 12-year-old girl was brutally murdered, and she shouldn't have been. And it's especially unjust that she was done so by two people that were in the country illegally, identified by their own government, arrested by their own government, and then released to do it. And at some point, if you're not willing to prioritize that, then what he's actually demonstrated is how lost this argument really is. And that's been one of my main sources of frustration. I can't tell you how many issues where I've looked at this and I said, okay, I'm assuming you're making a good faith argument. And so you've laid out your logical argument. I'm going to make out mine. And then when I win, when I demonstrate overwhelmingly that the logic I used was superior, or I demonstrated the faulty logic being utilized in another argument, all of a sudden they shifted to something else. What about legal? What about legal components? Okay, well, legally, this is what it means. Okay, well, what about this? And address that. And then finally it comes down to, what about compassion? What about, well, yeah, the way that you actually get to genuine compassion is that you actually look at reality, you look at logic, and then you apply it in such a way in order to arrive at policy or positions or conclusions which help people. Compassion is supposed to be the fuel and the motivation for why you understand logic. Because I can't override reality through compassion. I can only get to compassion through reality. And yet, he got all the way there. And none of them are moved. Why? Because they are operating off of a completely different understanding of reality, of truth, and morality. And one of these views is going to win, and one of them is going to lose, because it has to be that way. There's a lot of things that people can exist in society, in families, where they can disagree on things. There's a lot of things that we can have. We can chalk up to preference which have no inherent moral connotation. And then there are some things which are so fundamental to which we cannot peacefully coexist in society because one side has decided that they're willing to throw out everything if it means concentrating power and imposing their will. And I don't think they're all doing it because they're stupid or they're mean. I think they're doing it because they have become convinced that the outcomes they want are moral and just. And if you have to suffer as a result, well, then so be it. Well, I will do my best to debate with that. Because I do firmly believe that there's a reckoning coming in this country and that actually it's the upcoming generation that is looking at all of this and going, no, I agree with Stephen Miller. And I don't care what you call me. I'm certainly not going to let you brand me, but I don't care what you call me anymore because I see that you don't argue in good faith. But I agree with Stephen Miller. And so that's what we should be fighting for all the way up into the point where there is no option. Because as glorious as the option of, fine, let's just fight one another sounds, I promise you it isn't. I'm not saying it's never necessary, but I promise you that's not where you want to start and that's not where you want to end up if you can avoid it. Now, I will tell you this much. I'm not going to be ruled by people that think this way. I won't. But if there's any way I can convince people that are willing to listen, well, that's the strategy I'm going to use first. And so bravo, Stephen Miller, for doing an excellent job and being an excellent representative. If you appreciate what we do here and you would like to be more a part of the conversation, you see us answering questions in the chat and things like that, please consider joining our IC, our intentional community. We have the links in the description for that. And we love our audience. We love to be able to interact as we're doing this. We also love to be able to communicate within our circle community, to be able to have discussions that kind of lead on from this. We have a pregame and a postgame before every episode where we talk about kind of what's going on in the world, what's going on in each other's lives. It really is, in many respects, it's just a genuine community. And if you're looking for that, if you're looking for people that are like-minded, where you want to have important conversations, you want to be able to discuss important issues going on in the day, and you want to be able to understand different perspectives and make logical arguments and not be branded as an evil, bad, fascist every time you disagree with something the left is saying, well, we'd certainly love to have you in a community because that's the sort of people we are. So once again, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for Christian for all the research that you put in to do this. I think this was it's a great topic, and I have a new I fangirled a little bit about Stephen Miller, so that's my next goal. Next time I'm up at the White House, I need to I owe Stephen Miller a handshake and a drink. So once again, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next episode.